Good evening. In the middle of an election campaign, it was the last thing Boris Johnson needed. The American businesswoman Jennifer Arcuri is back in the capital, and this time she wants an apology from the Prime Minister. What favours her business did or didn't get while Boris Johnson was London Mayor is already being scrutinised by officials, and the nature of their relationship remains unexplained. Confusion she added to today, as our political correspondent Simon Harris explains.
Jennifer Arcuri used to have a direct line to Boris Johnson. They were very good friends once, but when she called his mobile last Sunday, she didn't get the response she was hoping for.
He always made time to answer the phone. And for the last almost 10 years, I've dealt directly with him. So now for
What happened the last time you tried to call him?
He said yes, hello, and hung up.
The Prime Minister's reluctance to engage in chit-chat with Miss Arcuri might have something to do with her decision to give a series of TV interviews. No fewer than 3 in the space of 12 hours. In one, she attempted to bypass the Downing Street switchboard with a direct message to Mr Johnson.
I've kept your secrets, and I've been your friend. And I don't understand why you've blocked me.
Miss Arcuri, a business student and tech entrepreneur, met Mr Johnson in 2012 when he was trying to get re-elected as Mayor of London. She persuaded him to speak at business conferences and joined 3 overseas trade missions organised by City Hall. She was paid almost £14,000 by the Mayor's marketing agency, London and Partners, and that's led to questions about whether Mr Johnson failed to disclose an interest. Both the London Assembly and the police conduct watchdog, the IOPC, are investigating.
I think over the last 24 hours we've seen the case against Boris Johnson on this matter growing stronger. There are clearly new issues that have been raised in the public domain. I think he should have maybe come clean much earlier.
Mr Johnson has refused to discuss his friendship with Miss Arcuri, and she was in no mood today to fill in the blanks.
I'm not going to go anywhere near the relationship question. I don't want to be pressured into admitting it.
Was it an affair?
I'm not going to answer that question, but as you can tell, there was a very special relationship there.
The Prime Minister has insisted there was no impropriety in his dealings with Miss Arcuri. But her decision to go public once again means the questions are not going away.
And Simon, the story's not going to go away then?
Yes, in the background to today's developments, those 2 investigations. We're still waiting to see if the Independent Office for Police Conduct decides to go ahead with a formal investigation into whether Mr Johnson broke the City Hall Code of Conduct by not declaring his friendship with Miss Arcuri. The London Assembly has decided to put its own investigation on hold until the IOPC comes to a conclusion. Meanwhile, as we've seen, Miss Arcuri is here in London saying exactly what, which is a point raised this morning by Lorraine Kelly.
What is the point of you coming on the TV to clear the air and then you don't say anything?
Well, I believe I said a few things. What is it that you're looking for that I say?
Well, you didn't answer any of the questions that were put to you, and I just don't see the point of you coming on, to be honest. Anyway.
Wow.
Well, the Prime Minister has managed to avoid any questions about Miss Arcuri today. Tomorrow it might not be quite so easy because he's appearing alongside Jeremy Corbyn in that very first leaders' debate here on ITV.
OK, Simon, thank you very much. Good evening. They've been campaigning separately in the capital and across the country for weeks, but in a couple of hours' time, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn will face each other for the first live TV debate here on ITV. Boris Johnson prepared today by promoting Policy, a new plan aimed at voters in London to crack down on knife crime. The Labour leader has kept a lower profile, appearing only at the Barbers. From Salford, our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Boris Johnson warmed up for tonight's contest in a boxing ring. He was also hoping to land an early blow on Labour with a new stop and search message aimed at anyone with a previous conviction for carrying a knife.
You will have, as it were, a personalised Section 60 order over your head, which means that the police can stop and search you just like that, just because of your previous record.
Not far from the boxing club, I met 2 Manchester University students who'll be glued to their screens. Lucia, who's from Kent, supports Labour. Jake, from London, is a Conservative.
I am interested in what Boris Johnson has to say about climate change in particular. I know that he has voted against measures to prevent climate change 7 times in Parliament.
Do you get a sense that this is Boris Johnson's to lose?
On the back of Boris's new battle bus, it says "Back Boris." We've really been selling Boris Johnson in this campaign, so he is absolutely at the epicentre of it. And if we do lose, it is going to be 100% down to him, I believe.
I am predicting that Corbyn is going to focus on the issues at hand, on Labour policies that he's planning to implement. And I'm actually expecting that Boris Johnson will resort to personal attack.
Because this election is so crucial, I expect them to go full into one of each other. I expect it to be not necessarily nasty at times, but I'm expecting it to be pretty brutal, not in an unpleasant way. I really want them to go hard on each other, if that makes sense.
Someone else hoping for a robust debate is the person in charge tonight.
What I really want as a moderator is to see the two of them engage and debate these key pressing issues that all of us care about, so we can really see the measure of both of these political characters.
Both leaders know they're taking a risk.
TV debates like this can change the course of an election. In 2010, Nick Clegg, against the odds, outperformed David Cameron and Gordon Brown and ended up as Deputy Prime Minister. But refusing to take part isn't an option. In 2017, Theresa May bottled it and lost her majority.
For Mr Johnson and Mr Corbyn, it's a chance to win over the undecided and perhaps even convert some diehards. Is there anything Boris Johnson could do or say tonight to make you think twice about backing Jeremy Corbyn?
No.
Is there anything Jeremy Corbyn can say tonight that would make you change your vote?
No.
While the PM practised his moves in the ring, his rival was fine-tuning his appearance with a last-minute trip to the barbers.
Well, Simon is in the media room in Salford for us now. Simon, a couple of hours to go. What do you make of how the two leaders have been preparing today?
Well, very different approaches, Duncan. Boris Johnson throwing punches, all pumped up. Jeremy Corbyn, who was the first to arrive here this evening, apparently drinking cups of tea and eating a Caesar salad. We've obviously seen and heard exchanges between these two men, both of them London MPs, of course, in the House of Commons, but never this close, eyeball to eyeball, as it were, in a TV studio. The dynamic between the two leaders is going to be fascinating tonight. Now, they may be poles apart politically, but both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn really share the same goals, namely to try to get a clear message across to floating voters about what they stand for, to get the tone right, that's really important, not to be goaded by their opponent, and above all, not to mess up. The stakes couldn't be higher.
Simon, thank you.
Now, with the general election just weeks away, many voters in London will want to hear how political parties plan to reduce violent crime. Today, the Lib Dems came up with their idea, pledging a public health approach to reduce violence. Their leader, Jo Swinson, will have wanted this to be the focus of her manifesto launch. But a senior member of the party has poured cold water on the possibility of the Lib Dems reaching number 10. Well, our political correspondent Simon Harris is here. Simon, what happened?
It's a wise party leader who's wary not just of their opponents, but also their predecessor. Just ask John Major about unhelpful interventions by Margaret Thatcher. Well, today, Sir Vince Cable, the recently retired MP for Twickenham, former leader of the Lib Dems, poured cold water on Jo Swinson's ambition of winning enough seats to form a government and cancel Brexit by revoking Article 50. This is what he told ITV News.
The point about revoking is in the very unusual situation where we get over 300 seats. I mean, I would love that to happen, but it's not going to happen. So I think people can forget about that. I mean, we are the party of the people's vote, going back to the public.
Really not ideal for Jo Swinson on manifesto launch day, is it?
She will not be best pleased. At her manifesto launch in Camden today, she was very upbeat about her chances. She also spoke about how the Lib Dems would tackle knife crime. And in contrast to the Prime Minister, who yesterday promised more powers over stop and search for the police, the Lib Dems manifesto talks of putting an end to disproportionate use of stop and search. Instead, the Lib Dem leader wants to place the emphasis on what we've heard a lot about, this so-called public health approach to tackling knife crime.
That is best done by a joined-up approach by the police working with other agencies, with healthcare, with youth work, and that's why we're promising, more police in the community to get to know people and understand those who might be most at risk, and also more money for youth services. So that's how we think we can best keep young people safe and also make sure that young people have opportunities.
The manifesto talks about giving every council ward an extra 2 police officers at the cost of £1 billion in London. That amounts to something like 1,300 extra officers, actually the same number that the mayor is trying to recruit. The Lib Dems say they can afford to do it because if they win the election, we don't leave the EU, the country will be richer. But that's a big if, and one that Sir Vince Cable clearly has no faith in.
All right, Simon, thank you.
To politics now, and Labour is planning the biggest shake-up on the railways in a generation. One of their election manifesto pledges is to renationalise the railways, claiming this will mean better services, cheaper fares and a guard back on every train. But what is the cost and how might it be funded? Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports on Labour's big promises.
Even on a grey day, today's trains are a kaleidoscope of colours. Green for Southern, red for Gatwick Express, blue for South Eastern. For a quarter of a century, commuters have become used to these assorted liveries. But now the clock could be turned back. Labour thinks the travelling public has had enough of privately run train companies.
I don't know that nationalising it is the way to go necessarily, because we've been there, done that.
It seems to me that a lot of these privatised companies making a lot of money out of commuters.
If services were more integrated, it might improve services, so that could only be good.
It's not an efficient system at the moment. Yeah, it's sort of running it for profit doesn't work.
If it's not broken, don't fix it, basically. It works perfectly well for me.
Nationalisation conjures up images from a bygone age. British Rail, starved of investment, ran trains which were not only clapped out but positively unsafe. These so-called slam-door trains, familiar to many commuters, could be death traps in a crash. The BR days are also remembered for frequent strikes when the rail unions brought the network to a standstill. This was a ghostly Waterloo in 1993.
I can remember it, and I remember the way it was under-resourced by central government, and I now look at the figures and find we're giving more money in subsidies to private rail operators than was ever given to British Rail when it was in public ownership.
Taxpayers subsidise the railways to the tune of more than £7 billion a year. That enables the private train companies to make profits of more than £200 million. And from January, they're planning to put up fares by almost 3%. Christian Woolmar is a railway historian and Labour supporter.
The rail companies make some profit, not a fantastic amount, but if they were renationalised, that money would be able to go back towards investing in the railways.
Even the private train companies admit the current system of franchises is broken. But while Labour wants to take the radical step of renationalising the railways, the government has opted instead to commission a review.
I think the problem is that privatisation hasn't delivered all the promised benefits. That's because politicians have continued meddling in the industry. We've got a hybrid system that's public-private, hugely complicated, and that's added to the cost on taxpayers too.
Labour hasn't said how much buying back the railways will cost, but is promising simpler and cheaper fares.
Simon, there was another announcement today which might be a vote winner amongst some commuters.
Yes, anyone who travelled on Southern trains a few years ago or who currently uses South Western trains will be familiar with the long-running row about whether trains need guards. Well, today the RMT union announced a month-long strike on South Western, beginning on December the 2nd, because it thinks the company has a secret plan to get rid of guards, although bosses deny it. Now, South Western says it will run an emergency service, but trains will stop at 11 o'clock at night, which is not great if you're at a Christmas party over that period. Well, Labour said today, if it gets elected, it will have guards, reinstate guards on every train, getting rid of the so-called practice of driver-only operation. The rail industry reckons that will cost around £200 million a year, which is roughly what they make in profits.
OK, Simon Harris, thank you very much indeed.